The scent of fresh lies and old money hung thick in the air. The funeral home was packed, executives in sharp suits, former colleagues whispering behind expensive handkerchiefs, and family members who hadn't spoken in years now pretended to grieve together. I stood at the front, next to my father's closed casket, staring at the golden nameplate. Jonathan Whitmore, beloved father, visionary businessman, and self-made mogul. The whispers around me weren't about grief. They were about money. Who would inherit the Whitmore empire? Everyone had theories. My father and as his only daughter, his most loyal child, I assumed I'd be the one. I had worked under him for 6 years, learning the business inside out. I had the experience, and most of all, his trust. But when I met my brother's eyes from across the room, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Daniel was too calm, too smug, too prepared. I should have seen it then, but grief blinds you. It wasn't until later that day, when I arrived at my father's headquarters to meet with the board, that I realized what had been happening behind my back. I walked into the CEO's office, expecting to find my father's desk untouched, maybe his old leather chair empty, still waiting for the next rightful owner. Instead, I found Daniel leaning back in the chair, feet propped up on the desk, sipping whiskey from our father's favorite crystal glass. My father had been buried less than 12 hours ago, and already my brother had made himself at home. I stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" Daniel smirked, swirling the whiskey. "Getting comfortable," I clenched my jaw. "This isn't your office." He laughed at that, really laughed, full and deep, before setting the glass down and reaching into a folder on the desk. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it toward me. I hesitated before picking it up. The words "Last Will and Testament" were printed in bold across the top. Under the section titled Inheritance and Succession, I felt my blood run cold. Everything, the company, the estate, the bank accounts, all of it had been left to Daniel. I swallowed hard. "This is a mistake," Daniel grinned like a wolf. "No, Melissa, it's not." I looked, back down, scanning the words again, desperate for any loophole, any way this could be wrong. But it was my father's signature at the bottom, his words, his wishes. Daniel leaned forward, dropping his voice to a taunting whisper. "I own everything now." He tilted his head, feigning sympathy. "You have nothing." I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have fallen apart. Instead, I started laughing, because a week ago, I had already made my move. Daniel's smirk faltered as my laughter echoed through the office. He expected me to break. He expected me to beg, to lash out, to collapse under the weight of betrayal. Instead, I wiped a tear from my eye, one of amusement, not sorrow, and took a seat across from him, crossing my legs like we were simply discussing business. Daniel frowned. "What's so funny?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Our father's desk, or at least the one Daniel thought was his now. "Nothing," I said, smiling sweetly. "It's just... You really think you won, don't you?" he scoffed. "Melissa, there's nothing to think about. It's right there in black and white." He tapped the will with his finger. "Dad left everything to me. You're out." I picked up the document and turned it over, scanning the pages as if I was really considering his words. Then I set it down gently. "I guess you didn't hear the news then." Daniel's cocky expression wavered just slightly. "News?" he finally asked. I tilted my head. "The board hasn't called you yet?" He sat up straighter, suspicion creeping into his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. Now it was my turn to toy with him. "You see, Daniel, while you were busy scheming and getting cozy in Dad's chair, I was making sure his true wishes were honored. I let that hang in the air for a moment before pulling out my phone. With a few swipes, I opened an email and turned the screen toward him. It was an official letter from Whitmore Enterprises' legal team. Daniel snatched the phone from my hand, his eyes scanning the email. His smirk vanished. This is impossible, he muttered. Oh, it's very possible, I said, leaning back and enjoying the look of confusion and anger twisting his features. The email detailed a company bylaw, one that Daniel had clearly overlooked. Our father had left him the company, yes, but the board had the final say on who could actually run it. And while Daniel might have inherited the title, he didn't automatically inherit control. The board had to approve the successor, and after reviewing his inexperience, financial recklessness, and incomplete lack of leadership skills, they had unanimously voted to reject his appointment as CEO. Daniel's hand clenched. This is a joke. I'm the rightful heir. You're the main heir, sure. But Dad knew you were the right choice. He took a slow breath, letting the next words sink. So, a week ago, he gave me power between Daniel's lips. What? I reached into my bag and pulled out another document. This one signed and legally binding. I have full control over company operations, I said, placing it on the desk. And the board? They back me. Daniel's face turned red. Dad wouldn't. He would, and he did, I cut him off. Because he knew you'd do exactly this. I gestured around the office. He knew you'd get drunk on power, make impulsive decisions, and drive the company into the ground. Daniel stood up so fast the whiskey glass nearly toppled over. You think you're so smart, he spat. But I own the company. I stood too, facing him across the desk. And I run it. We locked eyes, the weight of the battle between us filling the room. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to figure out a way around this. Some loophole, some way to turn the tables. But there was none, because I had spent years preparing for this moment. I had watched him, I had studied him, and I knew exactly how he operated. So, while he had spent years waiting for Dad to die so he could take over, I had spent years making sure he never could. Daniel exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. This isn't over, Melissa. I smiled. Oh, I know. Because this was only the beginning. Daniel was seething. I could see it in the way his fists clenched at his sides, his breathing shallow, his nostrils flaring. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered. For years, he'd been the golden boy, always skating by on charm and entitlement. But charm doesn't keep a company running, and entitlement doesn't override legal documents. I watched as he tried to process it all, how the company he thought he owned was slipping through his fingers. You still don't get it, do you? I said, sitting back down in the chair across from him, completely calm while he fumed. Dad might have left you the company, but he didn't leave you the power. That part is earned. Daniel's face darkened. This is my company, I tilted my head. Then why's the board meeting with me tomorrow, not you? His mouth opened, then snapped shut. There it was, the moment he realized he was truly screwed. The board didn't respect him, the employees didn't respect him, and without them, he was just a man with a title and an empire he didn't know how to run. He reached for the will again, flipping through it like he'd somehow missed a secret clause that would undo everything I'd just told him. I let him search, I let him scramble, because it didn't matter. I was prepared for this moment. He wasn't. Finally, he slammed the paper down. Dad always wanted me to take over. You must have manipulated him into signing that on power of other party. Shaikdamam. Irie. Manipulated him? Dad knew exactly what he was doing. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Do you really think he trusted you with an $80 million company when you can't even manage Your personal credit card debt. His face went red. I smirked. Oh, yes, I knew. Because while Daniel had been partying, blowing through cash, and making stupid investments, I had been watching, documenting, preparing. I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. Oh, and one more thing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Dad wrote this for you before he passed. Daniel hesitated before snatching it from my hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open, unfolding the letter inside. I already knew what it said. I had read my own version just last week. Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I know you, as well as I think I do, you're probably furious right now. But let me be clear. This was your doing, not mine. I watched you, son, for years. I watched you make reckless choices, squander opportunities, and expect rewards you didn't earn. I hoped you'd prove me wrong. That you'd show me you could be responsible. But you never did. So I did what needed to be done. The company I built is bigger than you, bigger than me. It needs a leader, not a spoiled boy with a famous last name. Melissa is that leader. You were given chances, Daniel. You wasted them. Now you'll have to learn the hard way. Dad. The room was silent. Daniel's hands gripped the letter so tightly I thought he might rip it in half. His breathing was uneven. His jaw clenched so hard I could practically hear his teeth grinding. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. Looks like Dad knew exactly what he was doing after all, I said, heading toward the door. Enjoy the whiskey, Daniel. It's the last thing in this office you actually own. I left without looking back, because I had already won. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The next morning, I arrived at Whitmore Enterprises an hour before the scheduled board meeting. I walked past employees who had worked under my father for decades, men and women who knew my dedication, who had seen me put in the hours while Daniel spent his time spending. And yet, understanding was one stalls and still tension in the air. Because the company was in limbo. My father's will had named Daniel as the sole inheritor, but my power of attorney had given me temporary control over operations. That meant the board had to make a decision. Either they would officially install me as CEO, or they would leave it to Daniel and watch the company burn. I stepped into the executive conference room where the board members sat waiting, men in crisp suits, old enough to have built their fortunes alongside my father. Some of them were loyal to me, others, they were waiting to see who would come out on top. Daniel walked in 5 minutes late. His eyes were bloodshot, either from lack of sleep or too much whiskey. I didn't smile as he took the seat across from me, because this was war. The chairman, Mr. Langston, folded his hands. Let's get straight to the point. We have 2 possible successors, and we need to determine who is best suited to run this company. Daniel sat up straighter, fixing his tie. Gentlemen, I think the will makes it perfectly clear. My father wanted me to run Whitmore Enterprises. That was his final decision. Langston turned to me. Melissa? I met Daniel's gaze, then slid a stack of documents across the table. I'd like to present some evidence before the board makes their decision, Daniel scoffed. More legal tricks? I ignored him. These are financial records from the last 4 years. They show a pattern of reckless spending, personal debts, and failed investments, all tied to Daniel. I flipped to the next set of papers. These are internal emails from the finance department warning about unauthorized company funds being redirected for Wisconsin. had read. You had no right, I continued, unfazed. And this, I slid the final sheet forward, is an investment report showing that just 1 week before our father's death, Daniel tried to liquidate over $10 million in company assets to cover personal debts. The room went silent, because now it was no longer a question of leadership. It was a question of trust. Langston exhaled, tapping the papers. Is this accurate? I nodded. All verified. The board members exchanged glances. Daniel was gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. You can't do this. I folded my hands calmly. I didn't do anything, Daniel. You did. And then I went in for the final strike. I pulled out one last document, one I had saved for this exact moment, a motion for an internal audit. Daniel's entire body went stiff. This is a formal request for a forensic investigation into all financial transactions made under your authorization, I said smoothly. If the board chooses to install you as CEO, this will be the first thing to happen under your leadership. Langston leaned forward, his expression serious. Are you suggesting there has been embezzlement? I shrugged. I'm simply suggesting that Daniel's financial decisions have been questionable. But if he truly has nothing to hide, then I'm sure he wouldn't mind a full investigation. Daniel's face was pure panic, because he knew what they would find, and so did I. Langston looked at the rest of the board. Gentlemen, I think we've seen enough. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. This is a setup! She's trying to destroy me! Langston turned to me. Melissa, if we vote in your favor, what will your first act as CEO be? I didn't hesitate. Stability. I will ensure that our investors, our employees, and our clients know that Whitmore Enterprises is in good hands. No reckless risks. No financial scandals. Langston nodded. And you, Daniel? Daniel was still fuming, his breath uneven, his face pale. He looked around the room, searching for anyone to back him up. No one did, because the truth was undeniable now. He wasn't fit to lead. Langston sighed. Let's vote. I didn't even have to count the hands, because I already knew it was unanimous. The board had just chosen me as the new CEO of Whitmore Enterprises. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. His hands were shaking. You think this is over? He hissed. I stood too, adjusting my blazer. No, Daniel. I think it just started. He stormed out of the room. I turned back to the board, shoulders squared, voice calm. Now, gentlemen, let's get to work. Because I had won the battle, but I was about to win the war. The moment I stepped out of the boardroom, I could feel the shift. The tension that had filled the air since my father's funeral was gone, replaced by certainty. Whitmore Enterprises was mine now. The executives I passed no longer hesitated before nodding in acknowledgement. Assistants, who had once avoided eye contact, now met my gaze with newfound respect. Because a leader had been chosen. And it wasn't Daniel. Speaking of my brother, he was nowhere to be found. I wasn't surprised. Losing the CEO title was only the first of his problems. There was still the matter of his financial misconduct. I stepped into my new office, my father's old office, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I had spent years sitting on the other side of the desk, learning from him. Now, I was in the seat he had always meant for me. But my victory wasn't complete yet. I pressed the intercom. Jessica, get me legal. A few minutes later, my father's longtime lawyer, Mr. Calloway, entered the office. He was old school, pinstriped suit, silver hair, a man who had helped my father build his empire from the ground up. He took a seat across from me. I assume this is about Daniel, he said. I nodded. I need to know exactly how much trouble he's in. Calloway opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick file. It's bad, he said bluntly. I skimmed the top page. Millions in company funds had been funneled through questionable investments, many of which led back to Daniel's personal accounts. It was theft, plain and simple. And now, with my new authority, I could decide how to handle it. Calloway folded his hands. The board will want to press charges. I exhaled slowly. And if I don't? He hesitated. Then you'll be seen as weak. And more importantly, if you let this slide, investors will assume Whitmore Enterprises tolerates financial misconduct. I nodded. That wasn't a chutney. Find out where he is, I said, closing the file. I'll deal with him myself. I found Daniel exactly where I expected, in our father's estate. Or rather, what used to be our father's estate. Now, it was legally his. But not for long. I parked in the driveway and walked through the grand front doors without knocking. Daniel was in the study, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking disheveled. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled. A man who had lost everything in the span of 24 hours. He didn't even look surprised to see me. Here to gloat, he muttered, swirling his drink. I shook my head. I'm here to talk about your options. Options? His bitter laugh echoed through the room. What options? You took everything, Melissa. I walked to the large oak desk, our father's desk, the one he had never let Daniel sit behind, and placed the file down in front of him. This is the evidence against you, I said. Daniel's hand froze midair. I continued, my voice even. If the board moves forward with charges, you're looking at embezzlement, fraud, and financial mismanagement. That's a prison sentence, Daniel. His face paled. He grabbed the file and flipped through the pages, panic creeping into his expression. This is exaggerated, he muttered. I crossed my arms. No, Daniel, this is reality, and right now, you have one way out. His eyes flicked up to me. I let the silence stretch. Let him feel the weight of his own mistakes. Finally, I spoke. You're going to sign over your shares. He flinched. What? You heard me, I said, stepping closer. You still legally own the company, but without control. That means you have one valuable thing left. Your stock. And you're going to sell it to me. His lips parted, but no words came out. If you do, I continued, I'll make sure the board doesn't press charges. You'll walk away with a payout instead of a prison sentence. Daniel gritted his teeth. And if I don't? I leaned over the desk, staring him down. Then I let the law handle it. And trust me, Daniel, they won't be as kind as I am. The silence between us was heavy. For the first time in his life, Daniel had no leverage. No daddy to bail him out. No money to buy his way out. Nothing. Just me, offering him the only chance he had left. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the pen on the desk. Then, without another word, he signed. The final goodbye. I took the papers, ensuring everything was legally binding. Daniel exhaled, shakily. So, what now? I closed my bag and turned to leave. You disappear, Daniel. Take your money. Start over, but you don't come back. He stared at me, defeated. Was this what you wanted? He asked softly. To destroy me? I paused in the doorway. No, Daniel. I wanted to save Dad's legacy. You destroyed yourself. And with that, I walked out. The company was mine. But more importantly, the Whitmore name was finally in the right hands. I didn't look back. Because Daniel Whitmore was just another lesson learned. And I had an empire to run. 1 week after Daniel signed away his shares, I sat in the Whitmore Enterprises headquarters, looking out at the skyline my father had helped shape. It was over. The battle, the betrayal, the years of watching Daniel take everything for granted, believing he was untouchable. Now he was gone, disappeared with his payout, stripped of his power, his legacy, his future in the company. And I had everything. The board had officially appointed me CEO. I now owned the company outright after buying out Daniel's shares. And for the first time in years, Whitmore Enterprises was truly in the right hands. My first order of business? Undoing the damage Daniel had done. Sitting in my office, I met with my executive team, going over every department that had suffered under my brother's reckless financial decisions. I cut out the wasteful projects Daniel had started to line his own pockets. I restructured failing divisions, bringing in new leadership that had earned their place, not inherited it. I personally called our top investors, reassuring them that Whitmore Enterprises was stronger than ever. And just like that, confidence in the company returned. The stock price, which had dropped after my father's death and the uncertainty around the CEO transition, stabilized. Whitmore Enterprises was no longer a family inheritance. It was a legacy, a vision, and I was the one leading it forward. A month later, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Melissa, came a tired, familiar voice. Daniel. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my fingers against my temple. What do you want? There was a long pause. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I lost everything. I let out a humorless laugh. No, Daniel, you sold everything. Another silence. I thought... He hesitated. I thought if I had the company, it would fix everything. That it would prove I was worth something. I closed my eyes briefly. Dad never cared about titles, Daniel. He cared about the people who built them. I get that now, he muttered. But did he? Or was this just another moment of regret before he found another way to ruin himself? I don't expect you to forgive me, Daniel said quietly. I exhaled slowly. Good. He let out a weak laugh. You know, it's ironic. I used to think you were cold, that you were too obsessed with working hard and earning your place. I thought Dad would hand me the company just because I was his son. I shook my head, staring at the skyline. Daniel had never understood. I never wanted Dad to hand me the company, I said. I wanted to be worthy of it. Another silence. Then he sighed. Goodbye, Melissa. And just like that, he was gone. A week later, I stood in front of the entire company, addressing our employees for the first time as their official CEO. Whitmore Enterprises was built on hard work, sacrifice, and a vision that stretched beyond one man, I said, my voice steady and confident. And today, I promise you this. We will honor that vision. We will not let greed, entitlement, or misplaced power define our future. I let my gaze sweep across the crowd. My father built this company from the ground up, but it's not just his legacy anymore, it's ours. A wave of applause filled the room. And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't just won the battle against my brother, I had secured my father's dream. Whitmore Enterprises would never be a spoiled heir's playground. It would be a symbol of perseverance, of leadership, of integrity. And most importantly, it would be mine. Because Daniel had never understood one thing. Power isn't given. It's earned. And I had earned every bit of it.